So chapter 23 is one of those books or chapters in the Bible where you're just kind of like, why is this important? Why is this included? And we truly believe that every word is inspired by God. And so I asked myself, why is this book important? Because we find that Sarah passes away. And what's interesting is she's one of the only women in the Bible that mentions her age at her death, which means she's held in high regard. And we see that it says that Abraham goes and he went to mourn for Sarah and to weep for Sarah. And this shows me that he is truly grieving. This is not a man that's like, oh, my wife died, no big deal. He loved his wife deeply. He was mourning. He was sad. And I think this chapter is important because we see that there is a time for grieving. And it says that he's there, and then he begins to look. He said, I want to be able to bury my dead away from me. And I think one of the things that's important in this is that grief is important and necessary for a time. But at some point, we must pick ourselves up and move forward. And that's what Abraham wants to do. He wants to bury his wife in a place away from him so that he can continue on living. And I think it's an important lesson that grief is important. You must go through grief. It's very, very important to go through the stages of grief. But when people decide to camp out there, if Abraham decided to camp out in his grief for his wife, he would have been in the wrong place and not what God had him to be. And so he's looking for a tomb. And there's a lot of things that are a little bit interesting about this passage. So he goes and he wants to find a place where he can bury his wife. And up to this point, we know that God promised him the promised land would be his, right? And his children's, it would be in his family. But up till now, he doesn't actually own any land in this promised land. And so I find it interesting that he goes to find a place to put a deed down and have a place to bury his family. And you can tell by the way he goes about it, he already knows the place he wants to bury them. He wants to go to this place near Mamre. And if you remember in Genesis chapter 18, this is a place where he built an altar and he heard from God. And I think that's so important that we see that Abram wants to bury his family. He wants his legacy to be where God spoke to him. And I think it's important for us to pay attention to that. Like sometimes we wander and we do different things, and we have to take our place back to that place where God has spoken to us, where God has given us a vision, where God has given us something. And so he goes to negotiate this. Now, the negotiation here is interesting because in that time, it was tradition for them to first come, say that they're interested in it. The other party then says, oh, I give it to you. But if he was to take him up on that, that would not be how it was done in their culture. That's the initial thing. It's more a formality. He wasn't really offering it for free. So then normally the party comes back and says, okay, the price is 500 shekels, 600,000 shekels, whatever. And this would be a really high price that they would name because it would be an understanding that they would then negotiate down to the price that they settle on. And what's interesting here is that this man then comes back with the price and Abraham says, okay, I'll take it. And he doesn't even negotiate with him. And I love this because he wanted to show that this land, this place where God spoke to him was so important to him that he wanted to A, have a deed in the land God promised him, but B, that he wanted to bury and have his legacy be where God spoke to him, that he said, I'll pay the full price. And I won't let you have any part in saying that you made this place mine because I want it to show that God did. He gave me the provision to take care of it. So I think it's interesting that that's where he chooses to bury Sarah. And then in the end, he's buried there. His children are buried there. And so it becomes a very important place in their legacy that he decides that this is where he's supposed to be. And it's the only deeded land he gets in the promised land. But it's cool because it opens up the opportunity for his children to go on. And sometimes I think we forget that what we do here on earth isn't just for ourselves, it's for the legacy we leave behind, for our children, for our children's children. And so it's important how we live our lives to even bring it on to the next generation and what we pass on. So today I want you to think about where is it that God had spoken to you? What is it that God has spoken to you? And I want you to return to that and remember that and make that a place of remembrance and an important part of your life. But then what are you passing on to the next generation? What is it that you are leaving behind for them in the promises that God has made to you and to your children?